In this section, Narad Muni is waging his attack on King Prācīnabarhi's ritualistic practices to be happy in this world. And in fact, he goes to the extent by saying that his sacrifices were actually adverse to the development of natural Krishna consciousness. So Narad Muni is first of all acknowledging his humble position and pointing out that even the most powerful Lord Brahma, who is Narad Muni's father, the father of all progenitors. So father in the sense, the spiritual father from whom he receives the gift of the disciplic succession. And Lord Shiva, Manu, Daksha, all the rulers of mankind, the first class brahmacharis, the four Kumaras, then the great sages like Marichi, Atri, Angira, Pulastya, Pulaha, Kratu, Bhrigu, and Vashishta, and then including himself, like Narad Muni, is pointing out that these are all stalwart Brahmanas, and they can speak authoritatively on any Vedic literature. And they are all very powerful because of three things: austerities, meditation, and education. In other words, austerities is their own self-control, the penance that they are going through, and their own knowledge or education, and then their practices like meditation. These are three things that make anyone very powerful. So austerities, meditation, and education. And it is true that they are all very powerful. However, even after inquiring about the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and whom we always see, that's also is being pointed out. They are so powerful, they even have the vision of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And yet, Narad Muni is claiming that we do not know perfectly about him. So, therefore, in the purport to this particular set of verses, Srila Prabhupada is pointing out that these all the above mentioned great personalities are not only powerful, being cognizant of past, present, and future, but are also devotees. Still, in spite of their great education in knowledge, and despite their meeting the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Lord Vishnu, they cannot actually understand the perfection of the living entity's relationship with Lord Vishnu. This means that these personalities are still limited as far as their knowledge of the unlimited is concerned. The conclusion is that simply by advancing one's knowledge, one cannot be accepted as an expert in understanding the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The Supreme Personality of Godhead can be understood not by advanced knowledge, but by pure devotional service. Quoting 18.55, Bhaktya mam vijanati yavan yaschasmi tattvataha. Unless one takes to pure transcendental devotional service, he cannot understand the Supreme Personality of Godhead in truth. So this is a fact that everyone has to accept. And therefore, the question of how one can actually develop one's relationship with the Supreme Personality of Godhead through the practice of Bhakti Yoga, that should become the full focus for all of us. And then the question is, can he be understood by any other processes like demigod worship? This 45th verse is very, very interesting, where it is pointed out that mantra linger vivacchinnam. These vivacchinnam are considered to be those who are partially powerful, or the demigods. So it's pointed out that even if one worships the demigods, bhajanto na viduhu param. that despite the cultivation of Vedic knowledge, which is unlimited, and the worship of different demigods by the symptoms of Vedic mantras, demigod worship does not help one to understand the supreme, powerful personality of Godhead. Srila Prabhupada in the 45th purport is writing that the demigod is described in the Vedas, Vajra Hastaha Purandaraha. This is talking about Indra, this demigod. So Indra rules the water supply with a thunderbolt in his hand. The thunderbolt itself is controlled by Indra. Similarly, other demigods, Agni, Varuna, Chandra, Surya, have particular powers. All these demigods are worshipped in the Vedic hymns through a symbolic weapon. Why is Narad Muni talking about these demigods? Because King Prācīnabarhi is involved in all these different Vedic sacrifices and rituals, which involve invoking the power of all these demigods. And therefore, Narad Muni is pointing out that that's also useless. Therefore, it is said here, mantra linger vivacchinnam. By such worship, karmis may obtain the benediction of material opulence in the form of animals, riches, beautiful wives, many followers, and so on. By such material opulence, however, one cannot understand the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And that's the key point. So one must therefore give up the fruitive tendencies as well as the pursuits of the Gyan Marg, even though they are prescribed in certain sections of the Vedas. So ultimately, what is one dependent on? Yada yasya anugrhanati Bhagavan Atma Bhavitaha. This is 46th verse. This verse is so beautiful. Sajahati matim loke vedecha parinishtitam. When a person is fully engaged in devotional service, he is favored by the Lord, who bestows his causeless mercy. At such a time, the awakened devotee gives up all material activities and ritualistic performances mentioned in the Vedas. This is very, very similar to also what Bhagavad Gita was talking about, that Nistra Gunya Bhavarjuna come above the modes of material nature, which also influence the Vedic rituals or the ritualistic worships. So Srila Prabhupada in 46th purport is writing that in the previous verse, those who are in knowledge have been described as unable to appreciate the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Similarly, this verse indicates that those who are followers of the Vedic rituals, as well as those who are followers of fruitive activities, are unable to see the Supreme Personality of Godhead. In these two verses, both the karmis and jnanis are described as unfit to understand him. So therefore, who is fit? As described by Srila Rupa Goswami, only when one is completely free from mental speculation and fruitive activity. Anya vilashita shunyam, gyan karmadi anavritam. One engage in pure devotional service without being polluted by material desires. There are actually two parts, so to speak, to this purport, which is bringing out the meaning of this word Atma Bhavitaha. Okay, so let's hear the first significance. The significant word Atma Bhavita indicates that the Lord is awakened in one's mind if one constantly thinks of him. Okay, so this is something wonderful about the pure devotee of the Lord. A pure devotee is always thinking of the lotus feet of the Lord. Savai Manaha Krishna Padara Vindoya. A pure devotee cannot remain a moment without being absorbed in thoughts of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. This is the first important aspect of a pure devotee. And then Srila Prabhupada talks about in this purport how Krishna reciprocates with his pure devotee. So that this constant thinking of the Lord is described in the Bhagavad Gita as Satata Yuktanam, always engaging in the Lord's service. Bhajatam Priti Purvakam. This is devotional service in love and affection. Because the Supreme Personality of Godhead dictates to the pure devotee from within, the devotee is saved from all material activities. Now comes the second meaning of the word Atma Bhavita in the same purport. And this is talking about now. So first part was how the devotee cannot remain, pure devotee cannot remain for a moment without being absorbed in the thoughts of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And the second part is the powerful service that only a pure devotee can render. So Prabhupada is writing, the word Atma Bhavita also indicates that a devotee is always engaged in preaching to deliver conditioned souls. It is said of the six Goswamis, Nana Shastra Vicharanika, Nipuno, Sad Dharma, Sansthapato, Lokanam Hitakarino. A pure devotee of the Supreme Personality of Godhead is always thinking of how fallen conditioned souls can be delivered. The Supreme Personality of Godhead, influenced by the merciful devotee's attempt to deliver fallen souls, enlightens the people in general from within by his causeless mercy. This particular verse and purport are just excellent. So the sequence in which Srila Prabhupada's purport flows is that first, Srila Prabhupada points out that yes, this whole karma and jnana are useless in trying to approach the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and therefore they must be given up. Okay, so who is giving those up? One who is a pure devotee. So what's the characteristic of a pure devotee? A pure devotee cannot remain a moment without being absorbed in the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So that's the first sort of point. And then what happens when a pure devotee is always absorbed in the Supreme Personality of Godhead? There is reciprocation from Krishna, from within. And therefore, the Supreme Personality of Godhead starts dictating the devotee from within, and because of which the devotee is saved from all material activities. And then the devotee also from within feels inspired to likewise help others in trying to help all the fallen conditioned souls and thinking about how they can be delivered. And in this way, they are engaged in enlightening the people in general, completely propelled by the causeless mercy of the Lord from within. So this is this wonderful sequence in which a pure devotee operates. So then Nārada Muni is pointing out very strongly in this 47th verse that you should never, out of ignorance, take to the Vedic rituals or to fruitive activity, which may be pleasing to hear about or which may appear to be the goal of self-interest. You should never take these to be the ultimate goal of life. Just see the extent to which Nārada Muni is denouncing all these fruitive activities which are sanctioned in the Vedic rituals. And last paragraph, purport number 47, the temporary comforts of life experienced either on this planet or on other planets are all to be taken as illusory because they do not touch the real purpose of life. The real purpose of life is to go back home, back to Godhead. Ignorant of the real purpose of life, people take to either gross materialistic activities or ritualistic activities. King Barishman is herein requested not to be attached to such activities. In the Vedas, it is stated that the performance of sacrifice is the actual purpose of life. A section of the Indian population known as the Arya Samajis laid too much stress on the sacrificial portion of the Vedas. This verse indicates, however, that such sacrifices are to be taken as illusory. Actually, the aim of human life should be God realization or Krishna consciousness. The Vedic performances are, of course, very glittering and pleasing to hear about, but they do not serve the real purpose of life. Therefore, in this way, Nārada Muni directed King Prācīnabarhi to go towards his real self-interest, which is to return home, back to Godhead. So in his purport to 48th verse, Srila Prabhupada is writing by instructing us how to become purified enough so that we can also attain to that eternal home Prabhupada very strongly writing here that one can go to the supreme planet or Param Vrajit simply by chanting the Hare Krishna mantra. This is especially meant for the people of this age, Kalir Dosha Nidher. It is the special advantage of this age that simply by chanting the Hare Krishna Mahamantra, one can become purified of all material contamination and return home back to Godhead. There is no doubt about this. It's a very, very strong message here. And then Narad Muni is pointing out that you have become proud of your killing of animals in the sacrifice, and this is extremely foolish of you. And pointing out that you can never please the Lord by such sacrifices, because he is pleased only by the performance of devotional service. And therefore, King Prācīnabarhi, you should direct all your activities as well as your education towards becoming elevated in Krishna consciousness. And pointing out, like in the 50th and 51st verse, how the recognition should be that the super soul, the Hari, who is situated also as the super soul and the guide of all living entities who have accepted material bodies in this world. He is the supreme controller of all material activities and material nature. And he is our best friend. So everyone should take shelter at his lotus feet. And in doing so, one's life will be auspicious. So in 50th verse purport, Prabhupada makes an interesting statement that everything is being directed by the super soul within the body. Therefore, the better part of valor is to take his direction and to be happy in this way. And so in the 51st verse, one who is engaged in devotional service has not the least fear in material existence. This is because the Supreme Personality of Godhead is the super soul and friend of everyone. One who knows this secret is actually educated. And one thus educated can become the spiritual master of the world. One who is actually bona fide spiritual master, representative of Krishna, is not different from Krishna. And immediately Srila Prabhupada in the 51st verse, purport quotes the Guru Vashtaka, that Sakshad Haritvena, Samasta Shastra Uktas Tatha Bhavyata Eva Sadbhi, that the spiritual master is described in every scripture as a representative of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The spiritual master is accepted as identical with the Supreme Personality of Godhead because he is the most confidential servant of the Lord. Kintu Prabhur Yaha Priya Evatasya. The purport is that both the super soul and the individual soul are very dear to everyone. Everyone loves himself, and when he becomes more advanced, he loves the super soul also. A person who is self-realized does not recommend the worship of anyone but the super soul. He knows that to worship the Supreme Personality of Godhead is easier than to worship various demigods under the influence of lust and the desire for material enjoyment. And therefore, the devotee is therefore always engaged in loving devotional service of the Lord. Such a person is a true guru. And finally, in the last line, success in life means accepting a spiritual master who knows Krishna as the only supreme beloved personality. One should worship such a confidential devotee of the Lord. So this section is just an amazing section, dispelling all attachments of King Prācīnabarhi, and likewise for those who are paying attention to this section, for all of us also, it's going to dispel all of these tendencies. So thank you very much.